9 Golden Age stars who ruined their face with plastic surgery. They were the faces that defined an era. Timeless icons whose beauty launched 1,000 dreams until they tried to stop time itself. The tragic irony of Hollywood's greatest stars isn't that they aged. It's what they did when they couldn't accept it. In their desperate quest to preserve the very thing that made them famous, they destroyed it forever. The saddest consultations I ever had revealed a renowned Beverly Hills plastic surgeon who worked from the 1960s to the 1990s were aging stars bringing in their own publicity photos from 30 years earlier and saying, "Make me look like this again." It was an impossible request that launched countless surgical disasters. These weren't just minor touch-ups or subtle refreshments. These were radical transformations that left beloved faces frozen, distorted, and ultimately unrecognizable. The very features that made these stars distinctive, that made them, vanished under the surgeon's knife. Most heartbreaking was a silent film legend who pioneered Hollywood beauty standards only to become a cautionary tale when early experimental facelifts left her unable to form expressions. The woman once called America's sweetheart couldn't even smile for the cameras that had once adored her, or the dashing leading man whose chiseled features melted into a shiny, immobile mask that shocked fans who remembered his natural magnetism decades earlier. They didn't just change their appearance, explained a Hollywood makeup artist who worked with many of these stars in their later years. They erased their history. The laugh lines, the expressiveness, the character that told their story surgically removed like it was something to be ashamed of. What makes these transformations particularly poignant is that they happened before modern techniques existed. Today's celebrities benefit from subtle procedures developed through decades of refinement. These pioneers of plastic surgery were essentially guinea pigs, submitting to experimental techniques with catastrophic results. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of these surgical disasters is what they reveal about Hollywood's cruelest contradiction, an industry worshiping youth that's fundamentally built on nostalgia. Stars sandwiched between these opposing forces often made choices that ultimately robbed us of seeing how their iconic faces would have naturally aged. Let's begin with the woman who helped build Hollywood itself, only to become one of its first plastic surgery casualties. Well, it's very nice to be able to thank them all. Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, frozen in time. Mary Pickford wasn't just a star. She was a star, co-founder of United Artists, the first actor to earn $1 million contract, the woman who helped invent modern celebrity. Her golden curls and expressive face made her the most beloved actress of the silent era. When people fell in love with the movies, they were falling in love with Mary Pickford, which makes what happened to her face in later years all the more tragic. Mary pioneered film acting and, unfortunately, she also pioneered celebrity plastic surgery disaster, explained a film historian specializing in silent cinema. She underwent some of Hollywood's earliest facelifts in the 1930s when procedures were essentially experimental butchery. Pickford's first facelift came around 1933 as she approached her 40s and struggled with her transition from Anna roles. The surgery was performed with primitive techniques, essentially pulling skin tight and cutting away the excess with little understanding of facial anatomy or the importance of underlying structures. These weren't the refined procedures of the day, noted a plastic surgery historian. Early facelifts were brutal, simplistic operations. Skin was stretched like canvas over a frame with no consideration for natural movement or aging patterns. The results were immediately concerning. Friends noticed a strange tightness to Pickford's face, an unnatural smoothness that limited her once expressive features. But rather than serving as a warning, this first procedure began a pattern that would continue for decades. By the 1940s, after multiple surgeries, Pickford's face had taken on the frozen quality that would become her legacy. Her skin was pulled so tight that natural facial movements became impossible. The expressive features that had communicated so much during silent films were locked in a perpetual mask. America's sweetheart turned mannequin, remarked a cinematographer who worked with her in her later years. The terrible irony was that the procedures meant to preserve her youth actually accelerated her retreat from public life. As surgical techniques evolved, Pickford continued seeking improvements, hoping each new procedure might somehow reverse the damage of previous operations. Instead, each surgery compounded the problem, stretching her features further from their natural state. By the 1960s, Pigford had become increasingly reclusive, rarely allowing herself to be photographed. When she did appear publicly, observers were shocked by her appearance. The too tight skin, the altered hairline from multiple lifts, and most disturbingly, the inability to form natural expressions. Douglas Fairbanks Jr., who had known her since childhood, reportedly didn't recognize her when they reconnected at an industry event in the late 1960s. After being told who she was, he later confided to friends it was as though someone had built a Mary Pickford statue with only a passing familiarity with her actual face. The woman who had once communicated volumes with the subtlest facial expressions could no longer smile naturally in her final years. When she received an honorary Oscar in 1976, she declined to attend the ceremony, sending a video message instead, carefully filmed to minimize the visual evidence of what had been done to one of cinema's most beloved faces. The saddest part was that Mary helped create Hollywood, then fell victim to its most destructive expectation, concluded the film historian. The very industry she built ultimately convinced her that her natural aging face was something to be erased rather than celebrated. While Pickford's surgical alterations reflected the primitive techniques of early Hollywood, our next subject took facial modification to an entirely different level, turning plastic surgery from private shame into public performance art. Brave was a real war hero, was he? And that's what I loved about him. He was so brave. He said, Joan Rivers, when plastic surgery becomes a punchline. While not strictly a golden age star, Joan Rivers straddled Hollywood eras, beginning her career when many studio system legends were still active, then transforming herself through decades of procedures until she became perhaps the most famous plastic surgery addict in entertainment history. She went from sharp-tongued to stiff-faced, noted a longtime Hollywood columnist. The tragedy is that her frozen features became the joke, overshadowing her genuinely pioneering comedy. Rivers' relationship with plastic surgery began conventionally enough. A standard eye lift in her 30s followed by a facelift in her 40s. But unlike most stars who denied having work done, Rivers took the opposite approach, making her surgical adventures part of her comedic persona. I've had so much plastic surgery. When I die, they will donate my body to Tupperware, she famously quipped. Her honesty was refreshing in an industry built on illusion, but it masked a deeper truth. What began as maintenance had transformed into addiction. By her own admission, Rivers eventually underwent hundreds of procedures. Facile lifts, eye lifts, neck lifts, brow lifts, cheek implants, chin reduction, Botox, fillers, and countless minor tune-ups, as she called them. Joan used to carry her medical records in a suitcase, revealed a longtime friend. Not because doctors needed her history, but because she couldn't remember everything she'd had done. It was less a medical record than a renovation log. The cumulative effect transformed Rivers' once expressive face into something increasingly artificial. By the 1990s, her appearance had become so altered that it generated headlines independent of her comedy. Late-night hosts who once feared her sharp tongue now made her tight skin the punchline. What makes Rivers' case particularly fascinating is how she weaponized her own surgical modifications, using self-deprecation as both shield and sword. When critics commented on her appearance, she simply incorporated more plastic surgery jokes into her act. "Nobody laughs at me without my permission," she reportedly told her daughter after a particularly brutal tabloid piece about her appearance. "I would make the joke first and better than they ever could." This approach worked professionally. Rivers remained relevant and working until her death at 81, but the physical cost was high. Her last appearance was all but unrecognizable from the young woman she had once been, not because of natural aging, but as a result of hundreds of surgical procedures having taken their toll. The tragedy wasn't what she had done to her face, said a makeup artist who had worked with Rivers in her later years. It was why she felt she needed to do it. Joan once told me, "In this business, wrinkles aren't character, they're unemployment." While Rivers at least could joke about her changed appearance. Our next subject pursued facial alteration with a disturbing fervor that appalled even surgery-obsessed Hollywood. Out of my apartment, thinking I was getting white, Jocelyn Wildenstein, the cautionary tale Hollywood couldn't ignore. Though not a golden age star herself, Jocelyn Wildenstein serves as an ultimate cautionary tale that far too many aging Hollywood legends sadly never took heed of. Her transformation was so extreme, so bizarre, and so well covered that it transcended the simple level of plastic surgery to a psychological casebook study in surgical addiction. She didn't age, she mutated, said a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon who rejected her as a patient back in the 1990s. What happened to her face wasn't about maintaining youth. It was about morphing into something inhuman. Weinstein's reported odyssey of surgery started off with a misbegotten attempt to try pleasing her then-husband, billionaire art dealer Alec Wildenstein, who, legend has it, was fond of big cats. According to various popular accounts, she underwent procedures specifically devised to give her feline features, high cheekbones, slanted eyes, and a flat nose. What resulted was astonishing. With multiple facelifts, eye reshaping surgeries, cheek implants, lip augmentation, chin restructuring, and enough filler injections to float a carnival, Weinstein created something that appalled even surgery-tolerant Hollywood. Her case represents the ultimate endpoint of surgical addiction, said a psychiatrist specializing in body dysmorphic disorder. When procedures are no longer about enhancement but transformation into a different species altogether, we move beyond cosmetic concerns into something much darker. What makes Weinstein's case relevant to our Golden Age stars is how perfectly she embodies the dangers they all flirted with. Many of them took a few steps down the same path she followed to its extreme conclusion. The belief that surgical intervention could not just maintain, but actually improve upon nature. I've had clients bring in her picture, not as inspiration, but as warning, revealed a high-end Beverly Hills aesthetic dermatologist. They'll point to her and say, "Promise me you won't let me go there." She's become the universal shorthand for surgical excess. Wildenstein reportedly spent over $4 million on facial surgeries, creating an appearance so distinctive that she can no longer move through the world anonymously. Her face has become a cultural reference point, appearing in everything from horror films to medical textbooks as an example of plastic surgery gone wrong. The truly sad part is that she apparently believes she looks good, noted a Society columnist who interviewed her in the early 2000s. There's a disconnect between how she sees herself and how the world sees her that speaks to how distorted one's self-image can become. Though Wildenstein represents an extreme case, our next subject shows how even the most sophisticated, elegant stars could fall victim to the allure of surgical intervention with results that betrayed everything their public image once represented. Love, and you want to go to bed with, and then you can work things out. Zagabor, Hollywood glamour frozen in place. Zsa Zagabor built her career on three things: her 9 marriages, her witty one-liners, and her extraordinary beauty. As she aged, she became determined to maintain the latter at all costs, a decision that ultimately robbed her the expressive face that had made her famous. She kept the glam but lost the expression, commented a long-time Hollywood photographer who documented her over decades. Watching her face gradually freeze into immobility was like watching a vibrant painting slowly get covered in lacquer. Gabor's surgical journey began earlier than most of her contemporaries, with her first documented facelift occurring in the early 1950s, when she was still in her 30s. This pioneering embrace of cosmetic intervention set a pattern that would continue throughout her long life. Zaza was brutally honest about aging. She hated it, recalled her former hairstylist. She used to say, "Darling, in Hungary we have saying, better to look good than to look real." And she lived by that philosophy. By the 1970s, after multiple facelifts, lifts, and other procedures, observers began noting the telltale signs of excessive surgery: the perpetually surprised expression, the tightness around the mouth that limited her smile, and the gradual disappearance of natural animation from her once expressive face. What made Gabor's transformation particularly poignant was that her persona had been built on vivacious charm and animated storytelling. As her face became increasingly immobile, she compensated with bigger jewelry, more elaborate wigs, and more flamboyant clothing, as if trying to distract from what was happening to her famous features. By the 1980s, her face barely moved on camera, noted a director who worked with her on television appearances. "We had to adapt our shooting style, because she could no longer express emotion naturally. Everything had to be conveyed through voice and hand gestures." Whereas many stars fled from public view as surgical changes accumulated, Gabber remained defiantly visible well into her 80s, even as her appearance grew incrementally artificial. This visibility created an unrepeatable visual record of progressive surgical modification, rarely chronicled so thoroughly. What happened to Zaja's face wasn't just about vanity, explained a cultural historian specializing in Hollywood's relationship with aging. It epitomized her sincere belief that a woman's value was inextricably linked to youth and beauty. She was a victim and the perpetrator of Hollywood's most destructive myth. During the final years of her life, after a serious car accident and failing health circumscribed her public life, Gabber became an increasingly reclusive figure. Her final photographs depict a face so reshaped by decades of surgical intervention that it bears little relation to the golden beauty who once entranced Hollywood. The cruel irony is that the procedures designed to preserve her famous beauty succeeded in erasing it. The historian continued, in attempting to remain forever young, she lost the very features that made her uniquely Zaza. Though Gabber's transformation reflected a lifetime commitment to glamour at any cost, our next subject represents perhaps something more tragic. A handsome leading man whose naturally good looks were ultimately betrayed by attempts to preserve them. I certainly have a lot of women, and you have said in your autobiography that you did Tony Curtis from Hollywood heartthrob to waxy immobility. In the 1950s, Tony Curtis embodied a new kind of male beauty in Hollywood, sensual, almost pretty, with dark curls and sensitive features that made him perfect for both action roles and romantic leads. His appearance in films like Sweet Smell of Success and Some Like It Hot established him as one of cinema's most attractive leading men, which makes his later transformation all the more startling. From matinee idol to wax statue, remarked a film critic who interviewed Curtis in his later years. It was as though someone had attempted to create a Tony Curtis mannequin with only a passing familiarity with human anatomy. Curtis's surgical alterations became noticeable in the 1980s when he was in his 60s, relatively late compared to many of his contemporaries. The initial work appeared minor, perhaps a subtle eye lift or minor facelift, but as the decade progressed, the changes became increasingly dramatic and less natural looking. Male plastic surgery presents unique challenges, explained a Beverly Hills surgeon who specializes in male facial. It doesn't just sit there, it migrates and hardens. It destroys surrounding tissues. The results were immediately alarming. Presley's face became asymmetrical with uneven contours and a hardened, unnatural appearance. Her once perfect cheekbones looked distorted. Her smile became lopsided, and the smooth contours of her face were replaced by irregular bulges. What makes Presley's case particularly heartbreaking is that, unlike stars who pursued excessive surgery, she was allegedly seeking only minor refinements. Instead, she became the victim of what amounted to medical assault by an unqualified practitioner preying on aging celebrities. The person who did this wasn't a doctor. He was a criminal, stated the Beverly Hills surgeon. And celebrities like Priscilla were particularly vulnerable because they needed discretion and were often referred through trusted social circles. The man responsible, Daniel Serrano, was eventually arrested and served time for practicing medicine without a license. But for victims like Presley, the damage was largely permanent. While some improvement was possible through corrective procedures, much of the industrial silicone could not be safely removed. Presley has shown remarkable courage in continuing public appearances despite her altered appearance. Rather than hiding away, she has maintained her charity work and occasional entertainment projects, tacitly acknowledging through her visibility that what happened to her could happen to others. Once elegant, later puffy, uneven, and overworked, observe an entertainment journalist who interviewed Presley before and after the disaster. But what impresses me is that she refused to disappear. There's dignity in continuing to live publicly after such a visible trauma. While Presley's case represents outright medical fraud, our next subject demonstrates how even conventional procedures can erase the very qualities that made a star distinctive. No, music Carol Baker, Hollywood's baby doll repackaged. Carol Baker exploded into public consciousness with her provocative role in Baby Doll 1956, where her unique beauty, sensual yet somehow innocent, made her an instant star and sex symbol. Her distinctive features, particularly her full lips and expressive eyes, set her apart from other blonde bombshells of the era. Those same distinctive features would eventually be transformed beyond recognition. She was Hollywood's forbidden fruit until she tampered with the package, remarked a film historian specializing in 1950s cinema. Few stars have so completely erased what made them special in the first place. Baker's early career showcased a natural distinctive beauty. Though conventionally attractive, she wasn't a standard issue Hollywood blonde. She possessed unique features that distinguished her from contemporaries like Marilyn Monroe or Jane Mansfield. Her slightly fuller lips, wider,